Move or I'll move you myself. The words cut through the ambient chatter of Rosie's diner like a blade through silk, carrying with them the unmistakable weight of a threat that has been delivered countless times before. Blade Morrison stands over the corner booth where Jessica Williams sits alone, his massive frame casting a shadow across her untouched plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. The leather of his jacket cracks as he leans forward, placing one scarred hand flat against the worn Formica table with enough force to make the silverware jump. Jessica doesn't look up immediately. Instead, she continues cutting her meatloaf into precise, methodical pieces, each slice exactly the same thickness as the last. Her hands remain steady despite the towering presence looming over her, though anyone paying close attention might notice the slight adjustment in her posture. The way her shoulders square almost imperceptibly beneath her faded military jacket. The diner has fallen silent around them. 23 pairs of eyes focused on the unfolding confrontation with the kind of morbid fascination reserved for traffic accidents and public humiliation. Forks scraping against plate, the soft hiss of coffee brewing, even the perpetual buzz of fluorescent lighting seem amplified in the sudden absence of conversation. When Jessica finally raises her gaze to meet Blade's, her blue eyes hold the kind of stillness that precedes either surrender or violence. She sets down her fork with deliberate precision, folds her hands in her lap, and speaks just loud enough for her voice to carry to the occupied tables nearby. "I'm sorry, did you need something?" The question hangs in the air between them, deceptively polite, yet somehow managing to convey that she considers his presence about as welcome as a rattlesnake in a nursery. Behind Blade, 4 more bikers spread out across the diner's cramped interior, their boots heavy against the checkered linoleum as they position themselves with the practiced coordination of men accustomed to intimidation as both art and science. Blad's laugh is harsh and humorless, designed to demonstrate dominance to his audience. "What I need, Princess, is for you to explain why you think you rate wearing that jacket." His eyes track across the military insignia, still visible on Jessica's worn olive-drab field jacket. Lingering on patches that speak of deployments and achievements, he clearly doesn't believe she's earned. "Because where I come from, stolen valor is the kind of disrespect that gets people hurt." The accusation ripples through the diner like a stone thrown into still water. Heads turn, whispers begin, and Jessica can feel the shift in atmosphere as curiosity transforms into judgment. She's experienced this particular form of harassment before, knows the script by heart, challenge the woman's service, question her right to wear the uniform, imply that military achievements are somehow beyond feminine capability. It's a tried and tested method for establishing dominance while maintaining plausible deniability. If you're already feeling the tension building in this confrontation, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where bullies learn exactly why they shouldn't judge someone by their appearance. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Jessica's response comes in the form of measured calm that somehow manages to feel more threatening than any raised voice. "The jacket was issued to me at Camp Pendleton in 2018. I earned every patch on it during 3 deployments overseas. If you have questions about my service record, I suggest you contact the Department of Veterans Affairs." She reaches into her jacket pocket and produces a worn leather wallet, extracting what appears to be a military identification card. The movement is smooth and unhurried, but Blade's crew tenses instinctively, hands drifting toward concealed weapons they assume she cannot match. "Captain Jessica Williams, United States Marine Corps," she continues, sliding the ID across the table toward Blade. "Service number 7742918. Would you like me to recite my unit designation as well, or are we finished here?" Blade snatches up the ID card, studying it with the focused attention of someone looking for any excuse to continue the confrontation. His expression shifts from confident aggression to frustrated confusion as he realizes the documentation appears completely authentic. Military IDs are notoriously difficult to forge, and this one bears all the correct security features, holographic seals, and administrative codes that mark it as genuine government issue. "Could be fake," he mutters, though his voice lacks its earlier conviction. "Anyone can buy this stuff online these days. Could be." Jessica agrees mildly, but isn't. The brief exchange has created an unexpected dynamic. Blade came here expecting easy prey, a civilian playing dress-up, whom he could humiliate in front of his crew and the diner's patrons. Instead, he finds himself facing someone who not only possesses legitimate military credentials, but demonstrates the kind of unflappable composure that suggests actual combat experience. From his corner booth near the window, Colonel William Hayes has been observing the confrontation with growing interest. At 72 years old, he's seen enough military personnel to recognize the real thing when it walks through a door. The way Jessica sits, the automatic scanning of exits and potential threats, the careful positioning that keeps her back protected and her hands free. These are not learned behaviors from weekend paintball games or action movies. They're the ingrained survival instincts of someone who has operated in genuinely dangerous environments. Hayes pulls out his cell phone and begins composing a text message, his fingers moving with surprising agility across the touchscreen. The message is brief but urgent. Need immediate background check. Subject: Captain Jessica Williams, USMC. Current location: Rosie's Diner, Highway 47. Situation developing, advise ASAP. Meanwhile, Blade has decided that backing down would represent an unacceptable loss of face in front of his crew. Real or fake doesn't matter, he declares, tossing the ID card back onto the table. What matters is respect. And around here, respect means understanding who runs things and who follows orders. He gestures broadly toward his 4 companions who have now positioned themselves to control every exit from the diner. Tank there used to wrestle professionally before he joined our family. Diesel's got hands like concrete blocks and a temper to match. Venom spent 5 years in state prison learning how to hurt people in creative ways. And Reaper. He pauses for dramatic effect. Reaper earned his nickname by being very, very good at making problems disappear permanently. The threats are delivered with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather, but their impact on the diner's other patrons is immediate and visceral. Conversations cease entirely. Silverware stops clinking against plates. And the elderly couple at table 6 begins gathering their belongings with the nervous haste of people who recognize they've stumbled into something dangerous. Jessica absorbs this information without visible reaction, though her tactical assessment of the situation updates automatically. 5 hostiles, armed but concealing weapons, controlling exit points, civilian casualties, a primary concern. Standard crowd control and intimidation tactics suggesting organized criminal activity rather than random violence. Professional evaluation, manageable threat if engagement becomes necessary, but escalation should be avoided due to civilian presence. Your friends sound very impressive, she says neutrally. I'm sure they serve your organization well. Organization? Blade laughs again, this time with genuine amusement. Sweetheart, we're the Crimson Wolves Motorcycle Club. We don't organize anything. We take what we want when we want it from whoever's too weak to stop us. It's called natural selection. The confession is delivered with the pride of someone who views predatory behavior as a legitimate lifestyle choice. Behind him, his crew nods approvingly, clearly accustomed to their leader's philosophical justifications for what amounts to systematic criminal activity. And what you want tonight is what exactly? Jessica asks. Oral respect, Blade repeats, though his definition of the term obviously differs significantly from standard usage. See, this diner sits in our territory. The people who eat here, they're under our protection. In return for that protection, they show proper appreciation for what we do. Protection from what? From us, mostly. The admission comes with a predatory grin that reveals teeth stained by years of tobacco use. Amazing how much safer everyone feels when they know we're on their side instead of looking for reasons to be disappointed in their behavior. It's a classic extortion scheme, extortion dressed up in the language of community service, but fundamentally no different from any protection racket that has operated in every major city since organized crime began. Pay us or face the consequences of our displeasure. Submit to our authority or discover exactly how creative we can be in expressing our disappointment. Jessica's peripheral vision catches movement near the kitchen doors as Rosie Martinez, the diner's owner, emerges, carrying a fresh pot of coffee. The woman's face shows the kind of resigned fear that speaks to months or years of systematic intimidation. Her hands shake slightly as she approaches occupied tables, refilling cups with the mechanical movements of someone going through motions, while her mind focuses on avoiding attention from the wrong people. Rosie there understands how things work. Blade continues following Jessica's gaze. Pays her monthly appreciation fee right on time. Never causes problems. Keeps her mouth shut when she should. In return, we make sure nobody bothers her customers, nobody vandalizes her property, nobody decides her parking lot would make a good place for drug deals or gang activity. The euphemisms are paper thin, barely concealing the naked extortion underneath. Monthly appreciation fee means protection money. Not causing problems means submitting to whatever demands they make. Keeping her mouth shut means never reporting their criminal activities to law enforcement. Sounds like a very efficient system. Jessica observes it is. But lately, we've been getting reports about someone new in the area, someone who doesn't understand local customs yet, who might need some friendly education about how things work around here. Blade's eyes narrow as he studies Jessica's face for any reaction. Someone who thinks military service makes them special, gives them the right to ignore community standards. The accusation is clearly a setup designed to justify whatever escalation Blade has planned. Create a narrative where Jessica represents a threat to established order. Then use that narrative to justify increasingly aggressive responses. It's Psychological Manipulation 101, the kind of technique used by bullies throughout history to transform aggression into righteousness. I haven't ignored any community standards, Jessica replies calmly. I ordered dinner. I'm eating quietly, and I plan to pay my bill and leave when I'm finished. If that violates some local custom, perhaps you could explain which specific behavior you find objectionable. Her response demonstrates exactly the kind of rational thinking that makes Blade's manipulation tactics ineffective. By refusing to become defensive or emotional, she forces him to either make increasingly specific accusations or admit that his objections are fundamentally arbitrary. Your behavior's fine, Blade concedes, then immediately contradicts himself. Your attitude's the problem. See, military people, they're used to taking orders, following chains of command, understanding their place in the hierarchy. But some of them get confused when they leave the service. Start thinking civilian rules don't apply to them. Start believing their own hype about being warriors and heroes and all that propaganda. The insult is carefully calculated to provoke an angry response, giving him justification for whatever violence he's planning to unleash. Attack her service, demean her sacrifice, reduce years of training and deployment to propaganda and delusion. It's the kind of verbal assault designed to bypass rational thought and trigger emotional reaction. Jessica's response maintains the same measured tone she's used throughout the confrontation. My service record speaks for itself. I don't need to justify my military experience to anyone, particularly not to someone whose primary contribution to society appears to be terrorizing restaurant owners. The counterattack is surgical in its precision, acknowledging his insult while simultaneously highlighting the fundamental difference between someone who has served their country and someone who preys upon their own community. It's the verbal equivalent of a chess move, shifting the dynamic from defense to offense without raising her voice or showing anger. Blade's face darkens as he realizes his psychological manipulation has not only failed, but been turned against him. Around the diner, other patrons watch the exchange with growing fascination, recognizing that the expected script of intimidation and submission has taken an unexpected turn. You got a smart mouth, lady, he says, abandoning subtlety in favor of direct threat. But smart mouths sometimes get people in trouble they can't talk their way out of. Is that a threat? It's friendly advice. See, we've been asking around about you. Word is you've been living real quiet-like, keeping to yourself, not making friends or connections. That tells us you're either running from something or hiding something. Either way, people without local support networks sometimes find themselves in situations where nobody knows enough to miss them when they're gone. The threat is no longer veiled, delivered with the casual matter-of-factness of someone who has made similar statements before and followed through on them. It's an escalation that transforms harassment into something approaching kidnapping or worse. From across the diner, Colonel Hayes' phone buzzes with an incoming text message. He glances at the screen and his weathered face goes pale as he reads the response to his earlier inquiry. His fingers begin moving rapidly across the keyboard, typing a new message with obvious urgency. These boys don't know what they're walking into, he mutters under his breath, though his words are lost in the general tension that has settled over the diner like fog. Jessica notices the colonel's reaction in her peripheral vision, filing the information away while maintaining focus on the immediate threat. Whatever Hayes has discovered, his body language suggests it's significant enough to warrant serious concern. You mentioned asking around about me, she says to Blade. What exactly did you learn? Enough. He signals to his crew and they begin moving closer to her booth, forming a loose circle that eliminates any possibility of casual departure. Learned you've been staying at the Pineview Motel for 3 weeks, paying cash, no visitors, no phone calls. Learned you don't have any local employment, any family in the area, any reason to be here except hiding from whatever you left behind. The information is accurate enough to be concerning, suggesting they've been conducting actual surveillance rather than relying on casual observation. Organized criminal groups with resources and intelligence-gathering capabilities represent a significantly higher threat level than random thugs looking for easy targets. Learned something else too, Blade continues, his voice taking on a tone of mock concern. Learned you've been having nightmares. Manager at the motel says you wake up screaming most nights around 2 a.m., thrashing around like you're fighting invisible enemies. Says it's been disturbing other guests, creating problems for his business. The revelation hits Jessica like a physical blow, though she manages to keep her expression neutral. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a common consequence of combat deployment. But acknowledging it publicly represents a vulnerability that can be exploited by anyone with sufficient cruelty and imagination. PTSD is a real problem for veterans, Blade says with false sympathy, especially female veterans who saw action they weren't really equipped to handle. Military puts women in combat roles these days, pretends they're just as capable as men. But biology is biology. Some people break under pressure that others can handle just fine. It's a multi-layered attack, combining misogyny with amateur psychology to maximize psychological impact. Suggests that her military service was somehow illegitimate because of her gender, then use her trauma responses as evidence of fundamental weakness. It's the kind of sophisticated cruelty that requires both intelligence and complete lack of empathy. Around the diner, the tension has become almost physical, pressing down on everyone present like atmospheric pressure before a violent storm. Other patrons shift uncomfortably in their seats, caught between the desire to intervene and the very reasonable fear of becoming targets themselves. Here's what's going to happen, Blade announces, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having his decisions accepted without question. You're going to finish your dinner, pay your bill, and walk outside with us for a private conversation about community standards and mutual respect. We're going to reach an understanding about your future behavior, and then everyone goes home happy. The euphemism is transparent enough that even the diner's other patrons understand what he's really proposing. Private conversation means isolated location where screams won't be heard. Mutual respect means submission to whatever demands they make. Everyone goes home happy means Jessica may not go home at all. Jessica continues eating with the same methodical precision she's maintained throughout the confrontation, though her tactical assessment has shifted significantly. 5-on-1 odds, unknown weapons, civilian casualties likely if violence erupts in confined space. Enemy demonstrating planning and intelligence capabilities, suggesting professional criminal organization rather than opportunistic thugs. I appreciate the invitation, she says without looking up from her plate. But I'll have to decline. Wasn't really a request, Blade replies. Wasn't really going to change my answer. The exchange marks a clear escalation point where pretense finally gives way to open hostility. Blade's crew recognizes the shift and begins moving with more obvious intent, hands drifting toward concealed weapons as they close the remaining distance between themselves and Jessica's booth. From his corner table, Colonel Hayes suddenly stands up, his movement sharp enough to draw attention from everyone in the diner. His face has gone completely white as he stares at his phone screen, reading what appears to be a detailed message that has fundamentally altered his understanding of the situation. Sweet Lord in heaven, he whispers, his voice carrying clearly in the silence. Boys, you have no earthly idea who you're threatening. The words hang in the air like a warning shot, causing Blade's crew to pause uncertainly. Hayes is clearly a veteran himself, old enough to have served in multiple conflicts, and his reaction suggests knowledge that changes everything about the tactical situation. But before anyone can process the implications of his statement, Blade makes the decision that will determine everyone's fate for the remainder of the evening. He reaches across the table and grabs Jessica's wrist, his grip tight enough to leave bruises. Time for that private conversation, Princess. And just so we understand each other perfectly, the conversation continues until I'm satisfied with your answers. The physical contact represents a line crossed, transforming harassment into assault and eliminating any remaining possibility of peaceful resolution. Jessica looks down at Blade's hand on her wrist, then raises her eyes to meet his gaze directly. For just a moment, something flickers in her expression. Not fear, not anger, but the kind of cold assessment that belongs in operating rooms and combat zones where decisions must be made quickly, and emotions are luxuries that can prove fatal. You have 3 seconds to remove your hand, she says quietly. Blade's response is a laugh that contains not a trace of humor. Or what? You'll call the cops, file a complaint? Newsflash, sweetheart. The local sheriff's department and the Crimson Wolves have a very understanding relationship. Deputy Chief Martinez appreciates our contributions to community safety, and we appreciate his flexible interpretation of local ordinances. The revelation of law enforcement corruption adds another layer of complexity to an already dangerous situation. If the bikers have official protection, conventional legal remedies become meaningless, and any escalation will need to be resolved without relying on outside intervention. 2 seconds, Jessica continues, as if Blade hasn't spoken. Around the diner, other patrons begin gathering their belongings with the nervous efficiency of people who recognize they need to leave immediately, but don't want to draw attention to themselves through sudden movements. The smart ones are already moving toward exits, understanding that whatever happens next will be violent enough to endanger anyone who remains in the vicinity. Colonel Hayes has his phone pressed to his ear now, speaking in rapid, urgent tones to whoever answered his call. Though his voice is too low to make out individual words, his body language suggests he's requesting immediate assistance from someone with significant authority. 1 second, Jessica says. Blade's grip tightens on her wrist, his knuckles going white with the pressure he's applying around him. His crew has drawn closer, forming a tight circle that blocks any view of the booth from the remaining diners. Whatever they're planning to do next, they want privacy for the initial stages. Time's up, Princess, Blade announces. Let's go have that conversation. What do you think is about to happen when this trained military veteran finally decides she's had enough? Drop your predictions in the comments below, because this confrontation is about to take a turn nobody in that diner is prepared for. He begins pulling Jessica from her seat, applying enough force to make it clear that resistance will result in escalated violence. His crew closes ranks, blocking sight lines and preparing to assist in what they clearly expect to be a simple matter of overpowering one small woman who has already demonstrated her unwillingness to cooperate voluntarily. But as Jessica rises from her booth, something in her posture shifts in a way that Colonel Hayes recognizes immediately. It's the same transformation he witnessed countless times during his own military career. The moment when a trained soldier stops thinking like a civilian and begins operating according to combat protocols learned through years of training and practical application. The change is subtle but unmistakable. Weight distribution adjusts for maximum stability and mobility. Hands position themselves for rapid deployment. Eyes track potential weapons and escape routes with the automatic scanning pattern that marks genuine combat veterans. Most importantly, the careful restraint that has characterized her behavior throughout the confrontation begins to dissolve as tactical necessity overrides social convention. Blade mistakes her compliance for submission, interpreting her willingness to stand as evidence that his intimidation tactics have finally succeeded. It's a fundamental misreading of the situation that will prove costly in approximately 15 seconds, though he has no way of knowing that his moment of apparent victory is actually the beginning of the most comprehensive defeat he's ever experienced. Jessica allows herself to be pulled partially from the booth, her movement appearing cooperative to casual observation. But anyone with combat experience would recognize the positioning for what it actually is: the setup phase of a counterattack that will utilize Blade's own momentum and positioning against him. Outside the diner, the rumble of additional motorcycle engines grows audible, suggesting that reinforcements are arriving to assist with whatever the Crimson Wolves have planned. The sound adds urgency to an already volatile situation, indicating that the window for peaceful resolution has closed completely. Colonel Hayes ends his phone call and begins moving toward the exit, but not in retreat. His path takes him closer to Jessica's position, and his movement suggests someone positioning himself to provide assistance rather than seeking safety. Despite his age, his bearing carries the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command in crisis situations. "Jessica!" he calls out, his voice carrying clearly across the diner. "Captain Williams." The use of her rank and full name causes her to glance in his direction, though she maintains awareness of Blade's grip on her wrist and the positioning of his crew around her booth. Hayes holds up his phone, showing her the screen where a message is clearly visible. "Pentagon confirms," he announces. "Operation Steel Rain, Force Recon Marines. Medal of Honor recipient." The words hit the assembled bikers like physical blows, each revelation more devastating than the last. Force Recon Marines represent the absolute elite of military special operations, soldiers trained to operate behind enemy lines with minimal support and maximum lethality. Medal of Honor recipients are warriors who have demonstrated conspicuous gallantry in combat situations that would break most people completely. But it's the mention of Operation Steel Rain that causes Jessica's expression to harden into something that belongs on battlefields rather than in small-town diners. Whatever happened during that classified mission, it represents the kind of experience that transforms soldiers into something fundamentally different from civilian understanding. Blade's confidence wavers as he processes this new information. Though his pride prevents him from releasing his grip on Jessica's wrist, He's committed to a course of action that looked reasonable when he was facing a lone woman with possible military experience. Now he finds himself physically restraining a decorated Special Forces operator, whose training specifically prepared her to handle multiple hostile combatants in close-quarter situations. The irony is lost on him, but Colonel Hayes understands exactly what's about to unfold. He's witnessed similar situations during his own military career. Moments when superior numbers and apparent tactical advantage prove meaningless against opponents whose training and experience operate on completely different levels. Son Hayes calls out to Blade, his voice carrying the authority of someone who has commanded men in actual combat. I strongly suggest you release that woman immediately and apologize for any inconvenience you may have caused her. Blade's response demonstrates exactly the kind of ego-driven decision-making that has defined his approach throughout this confrontation. Instead of recognizing the warning for what it is, he interprets it as further challenge to his authority. "Old man, you better sit down and shut up before you find yourself in need of medical attention," he snarls. "This is between me and the wannabe soldier here." The threat against Colonel Hayes represents the final miscalculation in a series of tactical errors that have transformed what should have been simple intimidation into something approaching a military engagement. Jessica's expression shifts one more time, and anyone familiar with combat operations would recognize the look that settles over her features. It's the expression of someone who has just decided that the time for restraint has ended, that civilian protocols no longer apply, and that the situation has escalated beyond the point where measured responses serve any useful purpose. What happens next will unfold in less than 60 seconds. But those seconds will contain enough violence and revelation to fundamentally alter the lives of everyone present in Rose's diner on this particular evening in late October, when 5 bikers made the catastrophic error of threatening someone whose training had prepared her for exactly this kind of situation. The countdown begins now. The 3 seconds expire with the precision of a countdown timer reaching 0. Jessica's response unfolds with the kind of mechanical efficiency that speaks to thousands of hours of training drilled into muscle memory until conscious thought becomes unnecessary. Her free hand moves in a short, sharp arc that intercepts Blade's wrist at exactly the pressure point where nerve clusters create maximum pain with minimal force. The technique requires surgical precision rather than brute strength, applying focused pressure that sends shooting agony up his entire arm. Blade's grip releases involuntarily as his nervous system overrides conscious control, his hand opening like a flower. Despite every instinct screaming at him to maintain his hold, before he can process what has happened, Jessica has twisted free and repositioned herself with the fluid grace of someone for whom close-quarters combat represents familiar territory rather than desperate improvisation. "Self-defense protocols engaged," she announces in a voice that has shed every trace of civilian politeness. "Minimal necessary force authorized." The transformation is so complete that several witnesses will later swear they were watching a different person entirely. Gone is the quiet woman who sat patiently enduring harassment while eating her dinner. In her place stands someone whose every movement speaks of lethal competence held in careful check. A predator who has decided that the time for restraint has ended. Tank, all 300 lb of former professional wrestler, lunges forward with the confidence of someone who has never encountered an opponent. His size and strength could not overwhelm. His massive hands reach for Jessica's shoulders, intending to demonstrate exactly how helpless she really is against superior physical force. But Jessica is no longer where his hands expect to find her. She has shifted her weight and position with minimal effort, using his momentum to redirect his attack into empty air while simultaneously delivering a precise elbow strike to his solar plexus. The blow lands with surgical accuracy, targeting the nerve cluster that controls diaphragm function and temporarily paralyzing his ability to breathe. Tank drops to his knees, gasping like a landed fish, his face turning an alarming shade of purple as his respiratory system struggles to remember how to function. The sight of their largest member rendered helpless in under 2 seconds sends visible shockwaves through the remaining bikers. 43 seconds remaining, Jessica observes with clinical detachment as if conducting a training exercise rather than defending herself against multiple attackers. Diesel and Reaper exchange glances that communicate volumes about their suddenly revised assessment of the tactical situation. Whatever they expected when they walked into Roz's diner, it certainly did not include watching their physically most imposing member neutralized with a single strike delivered by someone half his size. They attack simultaneously, thinking the coordinated assault will succeed where individual effort failed. Diesel swings a heavy right cross intended to connect with Jessica's temple while Reaper attempts to grapple her from behind. It's a textbook flanking maneuver that should overwhelm any normal opponent through simple mathematics and positioning. Jessica reads their coordination instantly, recognizing the attack pattern and calculating her response before either man completes his first movement. She ducks beneath Diesel's punch with minimal effort, simultaneously grabbing his extended arm and using his forward momentum to redirect him directly into Reaper's approaching tackle. The collision produces a sound like bowling balls striking pins, both men tangling together in a heap of confused limbs and frustrated aggression. Their practice teamwork becomes their downfall as Jessica demonstrates why military training emphasizes adaptation over strength, technique over raw physical force. 28 seconds remaining. She continues her countdown, though her breathing shows no signs of exertion despite having neutralized 3 opponents in rapid succession. Venom, the prison veteran who supposedly earned his nickname through creative violence to restore train, produces a folding knife from his jacket pocket. The blade snicks open with practiced ease. Cry skate, cry belt, reflecting the diner's fluorescent lighting as he advances with the confident swagger of someone who believes weapons automatically confer tactical advantage. "Let's see how tough you are when the odds even up," he snarls, holding the knife in a reverse grip that demonstrates actual familiarity with blade combat rather than Hollywood dramatics. Jessica's response reveals exactly why Force Recon Marines receive extensive training in weapons disarmament. She steps inside Venom's attack range with precise timing, her left hand intercepting his knife arm while her right delivers a focused strike to the pressure point that controls grip strength. The blade clatters across the linoleum floor, spinning to a stop beneath an empty table. Before Venom can process the loss of his weapon, Jessica has applied a joint lock that sends him to the floor beside his discarded knife. The technique is textbook military combatives designed to neutralize armed opponents without causing permanent injury. 11 seconds remaining, she announces, turning her attention to Blade, who has been backing toward the diner's entrance while his crew absorbed the brunt of Jessica's counterattack. The gang leader's face has gone pale as he processes the systematic destruction of his supposedly intimidating organization. 4 men who entered the diner as predators now occupy various positions on the floor, groaning and struggling to recover from techniques they never saw coming. "This isn't over," Blade threatens, though his voice lacks its earlier confidence. "You have no idea what kind of trouble you just bought yourself." Jessica's response comes with the calm certainty of someone who has faced genuine threats and found them manageable. "Actually, I have a very clear idea. You're a small-time criminal who preys on civilians because you lack the courage to face anyone capable of fighting back. Your organization exists through intimidation and corruption, both of which become meaningless when confronted with actual competence." She glances at the analog clock above the diner's counter, noting the elapsed time with professional interest. 47 seconds total. "I'm definitely getting slower with age." The casual observation lands like a physical blow, emphasizing just how completely she has dominated what should have been an overwhelming numerical disadvantage. 4 trained fighters neutralized in under 50 seconds using techniques so efficient that she barely broke a sweat during the process. Colonel Hayes approaches from his corner booth, his weathered face showing a mixture of pride and concern as he surveys the aftermath of the confrontation. Behind him, other diners emerge from their hiding places, staring at the scene with the kind of fascination reserved for natural disasters and military demonstrations. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hayes announces in the tone of someone accustomed to addressing large groups, "allow me to properly introduce Captain Jessica Williams, United States Marine Corps Force Recon Division." He produces his cell phone, holding it up so the screen is visible to everyone present. The display shows an official military photograph of Jessica in dress blues, her chest decorated with ribbons that speak to achievements most people can only imagine. Medal of Honor, recipient for actions during Operation Steel Rain, Afghanistan, 2021. Hayes continues, his voice carrying the reverence reserved for genuine heroes. Bronze Star with Valor Device. Purple Heart with Oak Leaf Cluster. Navy and Marine Corps Combination Medal with Combat V Device. Each award falls into silence like stones into still water, their impact rippling through the assembled crowd as the full scope of Jessica's military service becomes clear. The quiet woman who had been eating dinner alone is revealed as one of the nation's most decorated combat veterans. Operation Steel Rain was classified, Hayes explains. But I can tell you that Captain Williams spent 72 hours behind enemy lines, cut off from support, protecting wounded Marines until extraction became possible. She held off an entire Taliban company with minimal ammunition and improvised weapons, saving 11 lives in the process. The revelation transforms everything about how the evening's events will be remembered. What appeared to be a random confrontation between bikers and a civilian is revealed as the moment when 5 criminals made the catastrophic error of threatening someone whose training had prepared her for situations far more dangerous than anything they could imagine. Outside the diner, the sound of approaching sirens grows audible, multiple vehicles converging on Rose's location with obvious urgency. But these are not the corrupt local authorities that Blade expected to protect his organization's activities. Hayes's phone calls have reached levels of government that operate far above small-town corruption. The first vehicle through the parking lot belongs to the state police, followed closely by unmarked federal sedans that discourage agents wearing FBI windbreakers and expressions of professional determination. The local sheriff's department is notably absent from the response, though Deputy Chief Martinez will find himself facing federal charges within the hour. Captain Williams says the lead FBI agent as he enters the diner. Agent Morrison, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We received a priority notification about a potential threat to military personnel. Jessica nods acknowledgement while maintaining visual contact with the still groaning bikers scattered around the floor. Situation contained Agent Morrison. 5 subjects attempted extortion and assault. Local law enforcement may be compromised based on statements made during the confrontation. Her report is delivered in the clipped professional tone of someone accustomed to briefing superior officers. Each sentence containing maximum information with minimum elaboration. The agent takes notes rapidly, recognizing the significance of having a Medal of Honor recipient as a witness to criminal activity. We'll need full statements from everyone present, Morrison says, gesturing toward the diner's other patrons. This appears to be connected to a broader investigation into organized crime activity and police corruption in the region. As federal agents begin processing the scene and taking witness statements, the true scope of the Crimson Wolves' criminal enterprise becomes apparent. What began as harassment of a single veteran has exposed a protection racket that has been terrorizing local businesses for years, enabled by corrupt law enforcement officials who received regular payments for looking the other way. Rosie Martinez emerges from behind the counter where she has been cowering throughout the confrontation, tears streaming down her face as she approaches Jessica with obvious gratitude. "Thank you," she whispers, her voice thick with emotion. "They've been bleeding us dry for 3 years, taking money we needed for repairs and supplies, threatening to burn the place down if we didn't pay. Nobody would help us because they owned the sheriff's department." Her words are echoed by other business owners who arrive as news of the arrest spreads through the community. Shop owners, restaurant managers, and service providers emerge from years of enforced silence to testify about systematic extortion that has crippled the local economy while enriching criminals and their corrupt protectors. The investigation that follows will ultimately result in 14 federal indictments, the dissolution of the Crimson Wolves organization, and the removal of 6 law enforcement officials who had been receiving regular payments to ignore criminal activity. The protection racket that had operated with impunity for years crumbles in a single evening because 5 men made the mistake of threatening someone whose training had prepared her for exactly this kind of confrontation. But the most significant transformation occurs in Jessica herself. For 2 years, she has lived in anonymity, hiding from a military identity that carried too many painful memories and unwanted obligations. The confrontation at Rosie's diner forces her to acknowledge that some aspects of identity cannot be permanently suppressed, that the skills and values learned during military service represent integral parts of who she has become. Over the following weeks, as federal prosecutors build their cases and corrupt officials face justice, Jessica finds herself at the center of a community grateful for her intervention, but uncertain about her intentions. The woman who had been a mysterious stranger eating alone has been revealed as someone whose presence represents safety and competence in a world that often provides neither. The decision to remain in town rather than disappearing again comes gradually, influenced by daily interactions that demonstrate how much her presence means to people who have lived under threat for too long. Business owners nod respectfully when she passes on the street. Children wave from school bus windows. Veterans of previous wars seek her out to share stories and find understanding from someone who has walked similar paths. Colonel Hayes becomes her advocate and advisor, connecting her with resources and opportunities that make civilian reintegration possible without requiring her to abandon the values that defined her military service. Through his network of military contacts, she learns about federal programs designed to help veterans transition their leadership skills to civilian applications. The decision to open the Williams Veteran Center grows from conversations with other former military personnel who have struggled with their own transitions from service to civilian life. The facility, housed in a renovated building donated by grateful business owners, provides counseling, job placement assistance, and peer support for veterans dealing with combat trauma and adjustment difficulties. Jessica's first client is a young Marine recently returned from deployment. His eyes carrying the same Hoppy Hollow expression she remembers from her own mirror during the dark months following her medical discharge. Their conversation takes place in a conference room decorated with photographs of local veterans, a reminder that service continues long after uniforms are put away for the final time. "It gets better," she tells him, her voice carrying the authority of someone who has navigated the transition from warrior to civilian and found purpose on both sides of the divide. "The skills that kept you alive over there can be adapted to keep other people safe over here. Service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. It just changes form." Through the conference room window, Main Street stretches in both directions, lined with businesses that operate without fear. For the first time in years, the community has been transformed by a single evening's violence, but more importantly, by the recognition that heroes often hide in plain sight, waiting for circumstances that require them to step forward and accept responsibilities they never sought but cannot abandon. Jessica Williams, Captain, United States Marine Corps, Medal of Honor recipient, has finally found her way home. Not to a place, but to a purpose that honors both her military service and her civilian aspirations, serving those who served others and proving that the best battles are often fought not with weapons, but with compassion, competence, and the willingness to stand up when standing up matters most. The ghost has returned to the land of the living, and both are better for the reunion.